All right, everyone. We opened up our Big Ten live show yesterday by basically saying, will we be able to make the statement a year from now that the Big Ten is the best conference in America? Well, we know that we can make the statement right now, and we're able to make the same statement last offseason, the offseason before that, and the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before 15 years before that, that the SEC is the best football conference in America, and it is the gold standard. And we will look at the non-conference games that could change that narrative. We're going to look those over here at the Voice of College Football for the next couple hours with you. Welcome into our The SEC Live Show. It is the SEC Live Show right here at the Voice of College Football every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. We have left the link to call the show, so please join us there. And you can call the show, ask questions, and talk up SEC football. Of course, we're in the midst of spring football practice and want to let everyone know that, hey, I know this is a bad word and a naughty thing to talk about, but we've got Michigan spring game watch party coming up this Saturday. The only reason I say that is because we are going to cover spring football like nobody in the spring football games, like no one during the month of April. And so, Missouri aside, the first team that's out of the gate in the SEC is, of course, the Auburn Tigers. And we got Kyle Loomis on the line. We always enjoy the conversation with Kyle. You can catch his work and the rest of the crew there at E2C Network for everything Auburn. Kyle, how you doing today?
Doing very well. We're inching closer and closer to that spring game, as you already mentioned. We're in the right in the middle of all this stuff. So again, we're still getting not a lot of solid information to run with, but we're starting to get some conversations that are starting to circulate about what does the quarterback battle look like? Should we expect big things from the wide receiver group? And by the way, we just got a big commitment at the running back position as well. So we're actually starting to finally get some excitement, some solid excitement built in spring game.
So I have not caught that commitment. Can you fill us in? And at the same time, I'll be scurrying for more information on Auburn's latest.
Yes, I can give you a little bit of information. Jamarian Burnett also goes by the nickname Fat. That is PH Fat. And that's what a lot of his friends and everybody else is calling him. But Jamarian Burnett, he's out of Andalusia, listed at about 6'1", 220, 225 pounds. So a bigger back, at least on the bigger side of backs there. And this guy, if you're into stars and things like that, he falls somewhere within the 4-star area on most of those sites consensus wise. There's a lot of excitement about him. This is yet again another example of Coach Carnell Cadillac Williams, the interim head coach, but once again retained now as associate head coach and running backs coach, of getting his guy in his class every single year, dating all the way back to when he first got here with the guy who just left, Tank Bigsby. We were really excited about him. Listen, we're not sitting here thinking he's going to come in the 2024 season and start right away. There's a lot of other big backs here. But there's a lot of excitement about the depth that is building behind this really, really incredible group, obviously helmed by Coach Carnell Cadillac Williams.
So as Kyle just outlined here, we've got the 10th rated running back in the country, according to the 247 Sports Composite, 8th rated player in the state of Alabama. I have never heard of this town before.
Not many have. Andalusia is in the southern part.
Sitting here in Ohio, and I understand people's reactions, but I lived in Mississippi, like 15 minutes from the border for 7 years, and covered Alabama high school football and the Crimson Tide in Auburn for 7 years. But I've never come up with this town before. But Andalusia.
It's in the southern part of Alabama. It's an area that Auburn tends to have a little bit more exposure just because of proximity and things like that. When you think of the hot spots for Alabama, for instance, Mobile is their southern territory for the most part, at least historically. We kind of split Birmingham, the northern and western side of the state goes obviously to the University of Alabama, but Auburn's, bread and butter is that kind of lower southeastern to central area where they kind of find a lot of their guys in the state. And this falls right within that. Andalusia, little town on the way to the beach, if depending on which route and which beach you're going to.
Burnett ran for 1,473 yards, 7.9 yards per carry this past season, 17 touchdowns. So all of that certainly works. Very nice season and a great commit, a top 150 commit. Those are difficult to come by. So a top 150 commit for Auburn in the class of 2024. So we will be looking out for one fat with a PH Burnett and his rise through the ranks. And of course, not going to hear much from him, we wouldn't think, this fall, but certainly we'll track his career. We got Kyle Loomis on the line, and this is our SEC live show here at the Voice of College Football. You can catch Kyle and the rest of the crew there talking some Auburn football, baseball, basketball, whatever's going on, and not just athletics. And I've drifted by from time to time and sat and listened to Kyle and the group chatted up, and it's a good time talking Auburn. So you mentioned maybe some small little threads of information or just storylines or perspectives coming out of spring football. So what would those be?
Well, let's start with the thing that everybody always goes directly to, especially when you don't have a solidified quarterback, and that's who's going to be the quarterback at Auburn. It's going to continue to change. And I've watched other media entities within the Auburn space waffle this even yesterday. I mean, they'll come out and put out a statement saying, hey, seems like we're heading this way. And then there'll be something that comes out that day that's like, well, maybe this is a more moving situation than we think about it. So we have gone from, and I've been very adamant about this on your show, trying to get people on board with Robbie Ashford being the quarterback and being satisfied with that. Still think that should be in your wheelhouse, being preparing for that. But apparently TJ Finley in one instance is really made some strides. Or if you take the other angle on that, it may be that the other quarterbacks haven't made enough strides to win the job over from him. So there's still this waffling situation of this rumor that he's going to graduate at the end of the spring, go off somewhere else, that being TJ Finley. And that would leave us with two regular quarterbacks if you don't bring a transfer situation in there. And so Holden Geriner, who is the quarterback that was brought in by former head coach, wow, I'm even blanking on his name right now, Brian Harsin. Can you tell we're trying to forget that?
Well, I think he is going to be forgotten by many, but of course, diehard Auburn folks, I would think, would retain those couple of seasons. But yes, you've already moved on.
It's like a spot here in my head that I'm trying to, like, it's like a buzzing sound that happens. And listen, I have no ill will to Brian Harsin. I hate it didn't work out for him. You and I have talked about that several different times, but
I'm sorry to interrupt, Kyle. Do we know where Brian Harsin landed? Of course, I can Google this immediately. But I was just curious.
Right now, my understanding he is not anywhere. I think his son is in the middle of kind of his last days of high school and in the middle of trying to get recruited himself. So I think there's probably some family concentration on that as opposed to his career right now. Now that may have changed, in the next last day or so, but I did peruse on by the social media of our former head coach just to see what's going on, and didn't seem to indicate any inklings of anything anywhere. So he seems to be taking that, what we sometimes see, a sabbatical of sorts after you lose a big time head coaching job. No TV deals for him, I guess, though.
And I would hope that the financial situation is fairly secure.
I would think so.
Should be fine.
The numbers that were tossed around, I think he's going to be fine for quite some time.
Yeah. All right. Sorry to take you off track there, but back to the quarterback situation.
Yeah. But so Holden Geriner, apparently, a lot of people got hyped during Auburn's pro day, which we talked about last week, that he was throwing for a lot of the guys that were out there showing out for the scouts on pro day. I didn't really read much into that. I think a lot of people blew that out of proportions, but maybe there is something to that because, Coach Hugh Freeze yesterday in his press conference talked a lot about him. And, some of the questions were leading in that direction, wanting him to talk about that, but he's offering up this information freely. Coach has been very forward, saying these guys have got a long way to go to get where we need them to be. So it's really pick your storyline. Do you buy into Robbie's the guy? He's clearly the most athletic guy out there, gives you the most maybe upside as of right now. TJ would be the more experienced and more maybe stable in a sense, because you kind of know right now what you're going to get with TJ. And then there's this unknown with Holden Geriner, who seems to be making some moves in the spring, at least. I've heard some people say he's been getting a lot more reps, but then I've also heard the opposite of that. Without me being able to go to practice right now, that I'm not able to make those judgment calls for myself. But we're really just kind of starting to get this waffling circle of who really is in the starting position at quarterback, and we're probably going to not know that until the spring game.
Kyle, I love to review the non-conference games for every conference because I am fascinated as to seeing teams that never play get together for what is typically a home and home series.
Yep.
And of course, Auburn through the years has not been shy about scheduling difficult games out of conference. Excuse me. Penn State, of course, the most recent. Um, Clemson 5-6 years ago. About the most, well, of course, the Penn State trip would be the furthest north that Auburn has gone. I recall a trip to Kansas State, close to 10 years ago, something in that range. Going out to USC, 15 plus years ago under Pete Carroll, that trip. But there's a trip out to California to take on the Golden Bears. Not a very good football team, but just kind of interesting that Auburn would schedule that series, and they're going out to the Bay Area on September the 9th.
Yep. So we're going to not just take this trip, but we'll be taking another one in 2 years after that out to UCLA as well. And then we'll be getting Baylor. We're basically just going out west for the next 6 years, at least, every other year with the home and home situation. But yes, playing the Cal Golden Bears. I actually had somebody on social media share, it wasn't an Auburn person, but shared their stadium. I was like, oh, so that's what we're going to be seeing next year. Yeah, like you said, it's not a team right now that has had a lot of success that you probably put a lot of fear behind maybe losing to. Then again, Auburn's in a situation where it's yet again 2 years after another coaching change is having to rebuild. So you don't know where they're going to be at. So for me, I think it's going to be at least a test of some sorts. How successful Auburn it is in that, we'll find out depending on what California looks like and what we look like. But I'm really excited for Auburn to go see something new. And as you addressed, we've not been shy about going places, whether it's Penn State, Kansas State, USC back in the day. And there's been other opportunities such as neutral sites out in Texas and things like that. I love new opponents and seeing new helmets matched up against each other. I know that's silly just to think about just how the helmets look and stuff like that, but that really gets me excited. So this feels not only like a new start for Auburn's football program, because it is with a new head coach, but feels like we're about to start a fresh wave of brand new non-conference opponents that are going to be really exciting for the next 6 years.
And Auburn fans are probably understanding of this. They will have the opportunity to fill a lot of that stadium. I recall an Ohio State trip out to Cal, and it was like an Ohio State home game out there. So I would think that Auburn would have that same opportunity with Cal coming off a pretty dismal season.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about that right now, but at the same time, there's just so many unknowns for this Auburn team. So if there's any Cal fans, out there watching, I would say that you guys obviously having us at home stand a good chance of it right now. However, if Hugh Freeze is as good as advertising that we've seen him on each of his stops, get some quick turnarounds going with the way he's able to coach an offense up, and he's technically taking a step back and handing it over to Philip Montgomery, our OC, for the most part, and we'll see how much that extent actually is true. But the history is there of a quick turnaround. So for Cal Bear fans, I don't have any offering of what you can expect. I even think I think it's the third game of the season. You're not going to know a lot about this Auburn team. That may be the game where you actually start seeing the playbook opened up a little bit more, depending on how the first 2 games went, right? Because if can't put an offensive line together, which has been the history over the last couple of seasons, we still got to go and work on the basics at that point. I think it's going to be a fun matchup. Hopefully, obviously, I'm rooting for a humongous Auburn win out there on the West Coast, but it's going to be a fun matchup.
Yeah, and actually, it's going to be the second week of the season. And looking at the totality of Auburn's non-conference schedule, again, I don't think they can dismiss a trip to Cal, a Power 5 team, and Auburn not being established. Certainly can't look past that game. But if you look at Samford, New Mexico State, UMass, the other 3 games, Auburn should win 4 games outside the conference. And again, not to dismiss this team but they do get the lightest touch you can get out of the SEC Eastern Division. And certainly Auburn, if there's a school that deserves this, it's them, since they got to face Georgia every year. And then the rotation comes through,
Right.
Florida, sometimes if they're really good, Tennessee, whomever it may be. I believe it was Missouri last year. So they got to deal with Georgia every year, but it's a trip to Vandy in November to start out the month. And again, Vandy can't be dismissed coming off wins against Kentucky and Kentucky and Florida last year.
Yeah, sounds right.
So they're a much better team, as they improved greatly last season. But that's about as manageable as an SEC schedule can get, at least for an Auburn SEC schedule can get.
No, and when you look at it this way too, so you talked about maybe the non-conference is more manageable than it typically would be. No, again, no offense to the Cal Bear fans out there, but that's our biggest challenge, that it seems, being with just the travel situation alone. And then when you get into SEC play, obviously we know the gauntlet that Auburn plays every single year. SEC schedules are going to be changing soon. We all know that, and there's going to be more conversation about that. But we deserve this. Like you said, I'm sorry, Vanderbilt. We're not going to sit here and just think we're going to walk all over you. Chances are we probably might, but we do deserve this at this point. And it's funny, just kind of going to that conversation that's been circulating a lot of late about what the SEC scheduling is going to look like. In a situation where Auburn retains Alabama, in those 3-game scenarios that we've seen where you retain 3 SEC games. If it's Auburn and Georgia, Alabama and Georgia that Auburn has, we deserve Vanderbilt at that point. I want us to retain those 2 games in that scenario, but we got to have a Vanderbilt, a Missouri, or a Kentucky, the traditional lower tier teams of the SEC. Doesn't mean they won't have these moments. We've seen them. We've seen Missouri do that. We've seen Vanderbilt do that at times. But like you said, next year is a much needed year where the schedule needs to be favorable, and I'm thankful that it is, especially that home SEC schedule.
It seems like an easier process than it truly is, because yes, you have games to protect that have to be played. But in the case of Auburn and a few other schools, but I think Auburn is the classic example. If you try to protect everything, it's just too difficult. It's too difficult for the team. It's too difficult for that school. And there has to be fairness and balance and equity to the schedule.
Right.
And they can't constantly be trying to manipulate so if there's a regimented format to the rest of the schedule outside of the protected opponents, then they've got no control over trying to manipulate a schedule to ease it off, meaning that if Auburn's got 3 like enormously difficult protected games, that they're kind of trying to manipulate a lot of Missouri and South Carolina and Vanderbilt through the rest of the schedule. But I don't think it's going to be formatted like that. It's going to be very regimented. So they're going to have to ease off of that third opponent. I again, to your point, I would think, and I would hope.
Yeah, it's you hate to talk about some of those guys, those schools that way, but it's just the reality of where we're at currently. Obviously, times can change. Believe it or not, folks, there was a time when Alabama was an embarrassment to the SEC not too long ago, and Auburn was running up 6 in a row on them. People have forgotten that. So times will change. My hope is in that scenario, if that's what happens, a retained 3 that you circulate through. I know it just sounds like I'm a glutton for punishment, but we are, and the majority of the Auburn fan base are tradition just hoarders. We love tradition. We still lament that Auburn and Florida don't play annually anymore. And probably there's a section of us that feel that way about Tennessee. I don't connect with that one as much, but Florida is the one that I just lament about. So for me, I'm a tradition hoarder, and I just want Auburn in Georgia. Obviously, the Iron Bowl is not going to go anywhere. It's the best rivalry in college football, hands down. But if we have to lose an annual meetup with Georgia, it would suck from a tradition standpoint. And I'm hoping we can find a way to retain that, even to our own detriment.
Well, it is the Deep South's oldest rivalry. I just can't imagine it going away. I guess on the positive side, if there is a series of opponents that are matched up, and so, for example, if you're an Auburn fan, folks out there, and you don't get matched up with the teams that you want to, whether that's from a positive standpoint of, oh, this is too difficult, I don't want to see these teams, or we should have had them on our schedule and they're not here, at least the way it appears as though it's going to be formatted, it's not like, wow, this decision really alters the landscape of the conference and the scheduling, because we're not going to see that team except for every 6 years, as is the current. Like, when this current schedule was formatted, it really shaped the conference.
Yes.
The one going forward, even if you don't get a protected opponent, you're going to see them every other year.
Right. Right.
So it's not the end of the world.
Absolutely. And so that's one of the, some of these scenarios that we've seen floated out there, legitimate or otherwise, about what it might look like. There's reason to be excited still, even if you were to lose some of those now protected matchups, because you will see them so, closely. For me, as I've already addressed, missing the Florida matchup, what you lose in a scenario, if the Georgia and Auburn rivalry is not protected for an annual year, you may gain in some of these other traditional opponents that I had to make a judgment call of, was it 2019, I believe, going to Texas A&M for the first time or going to Florida. And my rationale was, well, as I know right now, I will not see this stadium with Auburn in it for another 12 years. I have to go. So the fact that I now don't have to make those type of decisions is nice, to be honest with you. So a better rotation through, even at the expense of a traditional rivalry that may not become annual anymore, I think is a fair thing to give up on.
Kyle Loomis, E2C Network. It's right here on YouTube. It's easy to find. E2C Network. That's E and the number 2C Network. So you can find it right here on YouTube. Do we know when the next live stream is?
The next live stream will be tonight. We are going to do a midweek check-in with the baseball program. But I always, if you're not a baseball fan, I stress people to come to our Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. It's just an open mic night, open calls, similar to what you do here, where people can come in and we will bounce on everything. Obviously, heavy sports talk, but we've got into what's the best place to eat in Auburn. Weird, we call them War Eagle moments, where you just have those greetings that you happen. I had one in Alaska one time in an airport. So that's just whatever Auburn is on your mind. That's what Wednesday nights are about. But Tuesday and Wednesday are the next two scheduled ones that we have coming up.
Kyle, thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate the weekly update, and you are always welcome.
Appreciate you. Thank you for having me again. War Eagle.
Great to see Kyle. And he leads us off today as we talk SEC football with all of you. And of course, we've got a number of media members that typically show up to talk their particular teams. I'm interested in some of the comments that are coming in. We've got Corey, who makes the statement here that I hope the SEC only plays 8 games still. The conference is so much better than the rest of the country, and playing 9 games is just too tough of a schedule. Okay, well, there are pros and cons there. So I understand your point, Corey, that the SEC is the most difficult conference and therefore the toughest schedules that will be faced by anyone in the country. Totally agree with that. And until something changes, if it changes, and probably based on the landscape of the sport and the way things are headed, won't change, the SEC will continue to be either the best, or there's a possibility that the Big Ten will be the only conference, the way things are set up currently. And again, this is the way they're headed even further down the road as we see the trajectory of those two conferences. The Big Ten would be the only one that could possibly dethrone the SEC as the best conference. But as it stands right now, best conference, and it's not debatable. So I understand your point that if you play 8 difficult games, so take especially the SEC Western Division, when it's been much better than the East, even though things have evened out. Take one of those teams from the SEC Western Division and look at their schedule. Look at poor Auburn, as we just mentioned. Not only have they played a Western Division schedule that has included the likes of LSU and Texas A&M and Alabama, and while people are going to laugh at Texas A&M, obviously they've been a really good team most of the time. Then they have to play Georgia every year, and then that rotation goes through, and it means that their other Eastern Division foe is Tennessee, or it's Florida, or it's a good South Carolina team, it's a good Kentucky team, and rarely do they catch any breaks in the schedule. Yes, no Rutgers, no Indianas, and Rutgers has been awful forever. Certainly for their entire stay in the Big Ten since 2014, Rutgers has been a layup. Certainly going to the Big Ten Western Division, Illinois at times has been a layup. not currently, but has at times been a layup. Northwestern currently a layup, even for a MAC school. So there are more breaks in the Big Ten schedule, no question about that. So I understand your point. However, there has to be legitimacy to the schedule. There has to be legitimacy in determining a champion. And the problem we have is that the larger the conferences become, and if you continue to play just an 8-game season within the conference, and there are 16 teams in the conference, think about it. You're playing 7 other teams, or you're playing 8 other teams, and therefore then remove yourselves. And there are 7 other teams in the conference every year that you are not playing. And that's what makes it difficult. And that's what has made the Big 12 schedule and championship determination the most legitimate in college football, because you've got 10 teams, you play a 9-game season in the conference, and you play everyone. There are no excuses for anyone. The only possible excuse I could have seen coming out of the Big 12 is something similar to what we just saw this past season. So think about this. TCU went 9-0 during the regular season in the Big 12. Kansas State won a tiebreaker, and they finished 7-2 in conference. I laid out some scenarios in which a 6-3 team could have made a championship game in the Big 12 against a 9-0 team, and then you have a 6-3 team that actually lost the regular season game to the 9-0 team. They upset them in the conference championship game. So it questions the legitimacy of the championship when the undefeated team by 3 games, and one of those is a head-to-head win, loses a conference championship game. So the more games that you have, or more teams within a conference, then you have issues with legitimacy of the championship. If these conferences get too large, then they're going to have to be treated just like the NFL, the AFC, the NFC, and they're going to have to be split into divisions, and they're not going to be able to play each other enough. So let's say we've got 24 team conferences in the future. It's going to have to be split up like the NFL, and they're going to have to be division champions that play in some kind of mini playoff before the college football playoffs. And the season itself, and the conference season, is going to have to be limited somewhat. So there is some kind of playoff within the conference just to get out of the conference. But that's what I enjoy about the Big 12 currently, is while the schedule is boring, meaning you don't have to look up the schedule because everyone plays everyone. So from a standpoint of looking up the opponents, there's nothing to look up. Just when are they playing and where are they playing? The legitimacy, I certainly credit. I don't credit the Big 12 because they fell into that situation. They didn't create that situation. That situation was determined based on defections from the conference. So, of course, the Big 12, like everyone else, was missing opponents during the season. And then Nebraska, Texas A&M, Missouri, and Colorado all left, and they fell into this current scheduling format that, again, I think is the most legitimate in college football. But that obviously is ending this season with 4 new teams joining the league. I want to say hello, especially to everyone out there that has signed up for our YouTube memberships. Thank you so much for that. We gave a big shout out to the likes of Exploring with Ben, Jason Moose, John Diadamo, A Damn Beast Media, Craig Cope. Thank you for being the only undisputed national champion there, Craig. Thank you for that. Tim, Joey Foster, Badger, and Bournemouth. And then we've got Jason O also on the line. We've got DS. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Certainly give us some feedback in terms of your membership. I know that in particular, looking at the first tier membership, which involves all of you, that there are special emojis that you can use. And so we can make that more appealing, more attractive. We can add emojis. We can do all sorts of things. So please, if you've got suggestions, please hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. If you've got suggestions for the YouTube memberships, I will certainly always be listening. All right. Dave says the conference pride is manufactured. I'm a fan of my team. So I don't think it's manufactured, Dave. Maybe it's manufactured by some. I know that certain fans of particular teams are manufactured. I know that sometimes interest in a particular sport is manufactured. I have a friend who is a bigger NFL fan than a college football fan, and he's made the statement to me that he wagers on bowl games because he's not that interested. And so he's manufacturing interest in the sport. I don't really understand that personally, because if I don't enjoy a sport, like I don't care if it's the World Cup. I don't like soccer. I don't watch it. I've never watched 1 second of the World Cup. Not 1 second. If I've watched 1 second, it was by accident, flipping by or walking by a screen at my former employers. Yeah, it was completely by accident. So I could say confidently, I've never watched more than 5 seconds of the World Cup because I don't like soccer, and so I don't watch it, even at its biggest, most grand event. Why would I watch it? So I'm not going to conjure up a way, but I do know a lot of people that don't like soccer, but they get all pumped up and fired up for the World Cup. Okay. And that's fine. That's a choice that they're making. I just don't understand it. So how I relate that to your comment, Dave, is that I believe that some people truly are fans of their conference, because I will say that I've experienced that myself, and it's not something that has to be conjured up. They just naturally root for the Big Ten, root for the SEC, root for the Big 12, whatever conference. And so I'm not going to challenge that in any way or discredit that. But I do believe that there are probably people, as you mentioned there, that may root for lesser teams in the conference, and therefore they take on the banner of the conference, and their heart's really not in it. There you see from Kyle the approach that many fans take concerning their conference, that they don't necessarily root for the teams in their conference, but they also understand that it benefits them when the conference is successful. There is a benefit to that. Yes, there's the point, Ed. I do believe that the SEC should go to 9 games played. I believe that in certain ways that there should be uniformity to college football. Now, there's not going to be forced uniformity because there's no conference, or there's no college football commissioner or governing body to enforce anything or create any kind of uniformity. Now they have to have agreement on the playoff because everyone participates in the playoff. So that's the one place where there needs to be agreement. But think about it. If the entire Big Ten decided we're not playing anybody anymore, we're going to do what Michigan's done for the last 2 seasons and not play anyone in the Power Five. And I'm picking on Michigan a little bit just because it's easy to do. But I know Michigan has not taken any kind of stance. Michigan typically schedules Washington and Oregon and Florida, and they've scheduled a number of, fine football brands throughout their history. No question about that. Michigan has scheduled difficult non-conference opponents, but currently nobody the last 2 years. And even the Washington game, of course, they were bad the season before. So really, Michigan has not played anyone good outside the conference since 2019 against Notre Dame. Point being that if everyone took that approach in the Big Ten, Now, they're not going to take that because it's going to hurt their relationship with their media partners and with their fans. And it's going to be embarrassing for the conference not to play anyone. But nobody else has any control over that. Again, the TV partners would, because there's an understanding that when CBS, NBC, and Fox lay down $1.1 billion for Big Ten football, that there's an expectation, and maybe it's written in the contract, that there would be a certain number of Ohio State, Notre Dame games, Auburn, Penn State games, fill in the blank. Good teams playing good teams outside the conference, because otherwise, then you lose a lot of ad revenue. Which brings me to the series that we're providing for you right now that I hope you would latch on to, that we've had a fun time and a very insightful presentation of TV ratings. So with the mess that is the Pac-12 right now, and I say that in a loving way, a mess in the Pac-12, we'll see if they pull through this negotiating period and come out with a great deal, then I will cease to say that it's a mess. But as it stands right now, it looks like a mess for the Pac-12. So what I wanted to convey in breaking down the 2022 college football TV ratings is just to get to the truth of how popular these conferences and brands are. And so we delivered a video a few days ago looking at the Pac-12's performance on TV this past season. So check it out. And now we released the Big 12. So we made that comparison. Of course, those are the two conferences that are the most compared right now for obvious reasons. The Pac-12 is hanging by a thread, trying to determine its future, trying to deliver a strong media rights contract that can hold the league together. And meanwhile, Brett Yormark in the Big 12 is just waiting and waiting and waiting and talking and having conversations with Pac-12 members to try to bring them into the Big 12, and just waiting for a collapse of the Pac-12 that they can take advantage of. So I wanted to compare how well the Pac-12 performs on television versus the amount of viewers that the Big 12 brings in. And now we've extended that because we want to look at the ACC. We posted that video yesterday. Check it out. We looked at the ACC. We will look at the Big Ten and the SEC, and then we will put all the numbers in the conferences together and make a apples to apples comparison, in which a few people out there, everybody mostly, is enjoying the videos. And I appreciate the fine feedback, because we're uncovering some things that aren't necessarily or normally talked about or displayed in metric form. So thank you so much for all the kind comments to the videos. There are a few people that have been detractors, and that's fine. It's not intended to be a completely exhaustive look at the TV ratings through number of years. I'm looking at 1 year, one season. Is it valid? Absolutely. Is it exhaustive? No. It's a strong indicator of where these conferences stand. Believe me, the Big Ten doesn't have great TV ratings 1 year and awful TV ratings the next year. Now, over the period of time, there are conferences who have improved their brand and improved their TV ratings, and other ones have declined. Yes, that happens over time. But I've had some responses on Twitter, like people expect that to display that the Big Ten was dominant in TV ratings and also the SEC this past season. Like, well, you need to look back before that. Really, do I? Do you think I really do? That Big Ten ratings just happen to be great in 2022, but they weren't in 2021. No, they are every year. The SEC every year. I will just throw out one nugget from those videos. The top 15 games in college football in terms of ratings were all SEC and Big Ten games. The top 15. And then I had somebody mention to me on Twitter yesterday, and this made absolutely no sense. Thanks, LFG. Appreciate that. There are 3 of those videos, LFG. He says he liked the video, or I guess you're liking this video. I don't know, or the videos possibly that I'm talking about, but check them out. Pac-12, Big 12, and ACC. But I had somebody mention to me on Twitter. They said that Andy Staples released a list of how many games reached 1 million views by each team in college football over maybe the last 5 years or 10 years. I forget the period of time. And they posted that and tagged me to basically say, this is better research than what you provided. Well, no, it's not, for a number of reasons. And again, I explained I did not do exhaustive research to give you a complete look from 17 different angles, but I gave you 4 to 5 angles. This is only one angle, meaning the Andy Staples list, which I'm not discrediting Andy Staples at all. It has nothing to do with him. He may have done research into a number of other things, but it was the Twitter person that was providing this list that said, well, this is more accurate because it shows over the last 5 seasons and not just one season. And these are the amount of games that each team played that drew more than 1 million viewers. Okay. Yes, that's a slice of information. So understand that every list, every metric provides another view, another piece of information that can be evaluated. No one statistic proves everything. You have to look at it from a number of angles, but just to look at a list of what teams had games over 1 million views is ridiculous. And to consider that, okay, when Ohio State draws more than 1 million views every game, okay, so their total is going to be every game played. And that 1 million mark is not going to justify their TV ratings pull because they average more than 6 million views per game. So if you're just looking at the conferences and how many games that they had at least 1 million views, you're not going to see the difference. You're not going to see the differences between the conferences. Although there are games, most notably in the Pac-12, but also in the other lower end conferences, especially, that are under 1 million. But that's not going to show you the difference. The higher you go in terms of number of viewers. So, for example, the Pac-12 only had 1 game over 4 million views last year. Well, the Big Ten had like 9 games. The SEC had like 9 games. More than that. The SEC had like 12 games over 4 million views. So if you're just measuring and providing a list of games that went over 1 million views, you're not going to see the differentiation. So I pointed out to this individual that when I worked at ESPN, because of the position I was in the departments I worked, I was able to access commercial logs and see the ad revenue, the price of every commercial spot. Well, the difference between, let's say, an LSU Florida game that was expected to draw 5 million viewers, that was on primetime on ESPN, versus the amount of ad revenue and what would be charged for individual spots on a West Virginia Oklahoma State game in the middle of the afternoon on ESPN2. Well, those were completely different. So the underlying message and theme to these videos is look at the TV ratings and you can relate those to dollars. Now, I can't do that exactly because I don't have the commercial log information right in front of me, but believe me, after looking at that stuff for 19 years, I know the difference between what a large TV rating is going to bring versus a decent TV rating. And that's why the contracts are being able to be negotiated for the Big Ten and the SEC at a certain level, and for the other conferences at a far lower level. Jason, thank you so much for the contribution. I appreciate that. Jason, again, is one of our YouTube members. So, Jason, we appreciate you being here as always. Mark, Big Ten SEC, go to 24 teams. I could see 20. Well, I'll answer it this way, and then I'm going to get to Wet Blanket's statement about Oklahoma State. I think there are basically, until something changes in college football, there are going to be two driving forces to expansion. And I'm not talking about what's currently going on between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. I mean, like long-term overall, there are two driving forces. And within these two conferences, there are two driving forces. So the two driving forces are exactly that, the Big Ten and the SEC. They are the ones that dictate everything. Well, put it this way, they don't dictate everything, but they dictate everything that's happening here, and then it trickles down, and then the other three conferences can make moves like we're seeing jockeyed right now between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. Those moves are being considered because the SEC and the Big 10 have no interest in those teams, those schools. So those are the two conferences that will decide, and everything will be impacted off their decisions. And then number two, I believe they're looking at two basic things that generally the Big Ten and the SEC look at the value of the schools that are available. Well, pretty much everyone's available now. Everyone's available. So if the SEC or the Big Ten want to take somebody, they will just go ahead and take them, aside from grant of rights and legal issues. So as long as the Big Ten and the SEC can look at the remaining field and see value. So right now, the Big Ten looking at Washington, looking at Oregon, possibly looking at Stanford, I would hope so, and Cal. I believe Stanford's actually the best of the four. But anyway, Stanford, Cal, Oregon, and Washington, looking at those four, the Big Ten is making a determination as to the added value. And if the value's not there, then they won't move. However, the other factor, and same with the SEC, the other factor in my eyes is that, let's say the Big Ten makes that determination about those four schools out west, but the SEC determination is we want Clemson, we want Florida State, we want North Carolina, we want Miami. And let's say the SEC is able to pull that off. Let's forget the grant of rights for a second and the squabble over how binding that is. Let's say the SEC, let's say the Big Ten has already evaluated those teams in the Northwest and says, we don't want you, you don't add enough value. Then the SEC looks at those four in the South, and let's say they make a move and they grab those four schools. Then the Big Ten may reconsider and say, even though once we add you, we're going to be slicing the pie thinner for our remaining schools, we still need to counter this SEC move and bring in better football brands to try to stay even. So that's my thought, is that there are two driving factors between the SEC and the Big Ten, and that's just evaluating the value of the schools in play. And then also, if the other makes a move, that they may need to make a move to stay on pace. So Wet Blanket says Oklahoma State does very well. Well, I don't know what that means exactly by Wet Blanket's definition. And Wet Blanket, we always appreciate you being here. I hope you know that. So let's go to last season's college football TV ratings. And you know what? Let me pull them up here on the screen. And I know this is an SEC show, but I forgot that for a second because I should be scouring the chat for SEC questions. And I will as soon as we get done with this, but I've already started down this road. So we're going to look at Oklahoma State in terms of TV ratings. So you all can be the judge as to whether these are good TV ratings. All right. So this is what you got. And I'll blow this up. So Oklahoma State, I know, didn't play anyone any good the first week of the season, so I don't think they show up in weeks 1 and 0. They don't. So they were playing on some kind of their game just didn't show up. They didn't get at least there they are against Central Michigan. There you go. So there you go. On a Thursday night, Oklahoma State took on Central Michigan on FS1 and got 402,000 views. That was one of the lowest rated games out of about 35 in weeks 0 and 1. Well, they were playing Central Michigan. So let's go to week 2. Oklahoma State played Arizona State. So, and excuse my voice, throat's quite dry. So on this Saturday night on ESPN2, Oklahoma State and Arizona State drew just over 1 million viewers. Is that a good number? Not really. They did draw more than Missouri and Kansas State did at noon. They doubled that audience. So that's a good indication. That's a pretty fair comparison. Arizona State, Oklahoma State against Mizzou and Kansas State. Houston, Texas Tech, that was on FS1. But as we go up the ranks here, you had a regional window on the Big Ten Network that did just as well. You had Nebraska and Georgia Southern that did like 20% better. You had another regional network, regional window on the Big Ten Network that involved Arkansas State and Western Illinois that got 450,000 more viewers. Or you also had a Big Ten Network draw that include Iowa State. Okay, that's a legitimate game, so we'll not use that. You had Penn State and Ohio University. That was a blowout at 1.55 million. So I'm not overly impressed with that Oklahoma State, Arizona State showing on ESPN2, although, again, much better than Mississippi State, Arizona, Mizzou, Kansas State, and Houston, Texas Tech. Although the Oklahoma State, Arizona State game was in prime time. Now, the next week, and Wet Blanket, you are going to show up here very prominently in some of these games against the likes of Texas. And I don't see Oklahoma State showing up in this game. I think after they played Arizona State, they played somebody really bad, and the game was probably not on network TV. Okay, then the next week, we've got week 4, and Oklahoma State doesn't show up in that one. I should pull up their schedule. I'm curious. Then we're going to get back to the SEC. We really will, folks. I can't get going on something like this. Oklahoma State, after Arizona State, they played Arkansas Pine Bluff. Then they had a bye week. Okay, so they wouldn't be there for the next 2 weeks. Then they played Baylor. So at this point in the season, Baylor, Oklahoma State got off to a great start. Baylor did not. So the game's on Fox, 2.4 million. That's a decent showing. Consider, though, Michigan, Iowa, also on Fox, got almost 2 million more views. And all those other games got more views. So the Oklahoma State Baylor game was 246, number 8 that week. So that's a decent showing. It's not phenomenal, but it's decent. The next week, Oklahoma State played Texas Tech. There you see the game at number, it's, I believe, 11th in the country at 1.6 million views. So Oklahoma State is a decent draw. That game was on FS1. So it should be noted there that they actually drew a pretty good crowd for an FS1 game. And that was a 3:30 game, Eastern time. Then we got Oklahoma State. Who are they playing here in week 7? Oklahoma State in week 7, the week after the Texas Tech game. They were playing TCU. Where's that game? There it is. So they played on ABC against TCU, who, as the season wore on, TCU gained a ton of viewership. People were curious and interested in TCU, and TCU outdrew what they typically would during a typical TCU 8-4 season. And there you see Oklahoma State and TCU with over 2 million views. They were and that week was Alabama, Tennessee, of course, just crushed it. And Penn State and Michigan, to a lesser degree, were just the dominant games of the week. What's interesting to note here is anytime you can find the competition. So it's not just about the viewership, but it's about who was that particular game up against. Well, so look at Clemson, Florida State at number 3, USC, Utah, number 4, LSU, Florida at number 5. All those games, plus Stanford, Notre Dame, all were up against each other. Prime time. They all kicked off right around the same time, between 7 and 8 o'clock. So all those games were against each other. This Oklahoma State TCU game at 3:30, that went up against Alabama, Tennessee. Then we've got Oklahoma State the next week with a big game against Texas, the second highest rated game of the week. So that's impressive. Texas, Oklahoma State, 3:30 Eastern, going up against Ole Miss, LSU. Outdrew Ole Miss and LSU. That's impressive. And outdrew UCLA, Oregon. That was a really good game. So they outdrew those two games and Purdue and Wisconsin on ESPN. So good showing there, wet blanket out of Oklahoma State, week 8 for sure. So that was a combination, I think, of Texas drawing a crowd, but Oklahoma State as well. The game against Kansas State, that's on Fox, 3.3 million. That was the second highest rated game during that time slot. Number 2 behind, of course, Florida, Georgia, behind them by 2.3 million. And you see that Ohio State and Penn State dominated that week. And then we move to week 9 or week 10, Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State at this point in the season was dying. They were dying a quick death. They played Kansas that week. So they're probably way down here. Not finding. Oh, there they are. Oklahoma State, Kansas. Lowly rated game, FS1, 730,000. At that point in the season, Oklahoma State's done. Kansas is no draw. So that's a bad showing. Week 11, Oklahoma State was playing Iowa State. So not a whole lot of people are going to watch that game. Let's see where that showed up. Way down the list, probably like 25th on ESPNU. So that factors in as well. That's difficult to draw anyone to ESPNU. I think the highest crowd I saw on an ESPNU game last season was 610,000 people watched North Carolina and App State. 272 watched Oklahoma State, Iowa State. And then we had week 12, Oklahoma State, again, limping down the stretch as they played poorly. Oklahoma. So that should be a highly rated game because not as much as most seasons, but still a top 10 game there at number 7. Bedlam at 3 million views. And then the final game of the season, Oklahoma State against West Virginia. I can guarantee that wasn't much of a draw. Oklahoma State and West Virginia. Yeah, it's way down here. Where in the world is it? Oklahoma State and West Virginia, all the way down here with less than 700,000 viewers. on ESPN2 at noon. Well, it had to go up against Ohio State and Michigan, the highest rated game of the season by far. It was also up against Baylor in Texas, Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech. So think of how many people were watching college football the last week of the season at noon. There were 17 plus million people watching Ohio State, Michigan. Then you had 2.5 million watching Texas, Baylor. So we're up to about almost 20 million people. And then also at noon, Georgia, Georgia Tech at 2 million. So you're at 22. You had Cincinnati and Tulane that almost got 2 million views. So we're at like 24 million. And then we had Boise State and Utah State. That outdrew the Oklahoma State, West Virginia game. It was on CBS with almost 1.5 million people watching the Utah State and Boise State on at the same time as Ohio. No, that was Friday. My bad. That was Friday. So knock that one out. And then we go to the next noon game, which was that Oklahoma State, West Virginia game. So if you put all that together, plus odds and ends all over the place, people can watch, Rutgers and Maryland, 97th. That's going to be like the lowest. That would be the lowest rated Big Ten Network game you're going to find. Conference game for sure. 97,000 watching Rutgers and Maryland at the same time as Ohio State and Michigan were on. Interesting stuff there. And while we're at it, we'll continue talking SEC football. We got Kevin McGuffey on the line. Look at Kevin today, giving us a different look every week, Kevin.
Yeah, I was going to make that joke with you that, I'm going to be in a different part of the TV station every week, it seems like, because like I have one little area that I usually go to, and that's the salespeople are having conferences, and there's another room somebody else using it. So I was like, okay, here, and we got the nice little UK thing behind me.
Well done.
Signed by, I think, Stoops. You can't see it, but it's signed by like Stoops and John Calipari. So
nice.
Kind of a cool
I'm looking
little
for my
thing.
Kentucky helmet so I can match you here. We'll get that fixed up here in a second.
That's all right.
Yeah, Kevin joins us from the TV station there, WLEX, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Absolutely.
Sir.
Yes. Wanted to make sure I got
NBC
that
station
correct.
here in Lexington. Yep.
So Kevin's moving around the station. Maybe he'll join us from the set one week. Maybe we'll get a look at the maintenance closet. I don't know, the engineering room, transmission.
That'll be next week. I'll get in like our master control where it's nice and dark and everything. So, but yeah.
All right, Kevin, we want to make set adjustments for you.
I appreciate it. That's right.
There we go.
I was trying to see what else you had behind you there. So,
it's an all SEC rack for the show here, but Kentucky didn't make the grade initially.
That's okay.
I was just grabbing helmets.
I understand. Totally understandable. So,
how were things today?
Good. It's another lovely spring day here in Lexington. Cats back practicing and going from there. We just had you and I talked about it last week. We had the UK Pro Day on Friday. It was a big deal for Kentucky because pretty much you had the national spotlight on the program. It was broadcast live on the SEC network for once. It was on NFL Network Plus online, but you had some big hitters here. They were all here to watch Will Levis throw the football. There was 11 guys total, and I think Levis did some good things. Showed he 77.
Going back a ways.
Yeah, it is. For a long time there, that was about the only wins we had. But Kentucky's doing quite well against Florida these days. So knock on wood, let's hope that continues. But as I was saying, Levis obviously showed off his arm strength, which is what everybody expected. Jordan Rogers was on the broadcast. He gave him kind of like a B+, A- grade. he did have some issues with some intermediate passes, which is, if anybody's watched Kentucky football the last couple of years, you've known that's been an issue. A little bit maybe with his footwork, but I don't think anything that just jumped out. I still think unless something crazy happens, he's going to be a top 10 pick, and we'll see. We'll see where he goes. Had dinner with the Carolina Panthers brass the night before pro day. So I don't anticipate that Levis is going to go number one. I mean, I think it's Stroud and Bryce Young, and then you have Richardson, Levis, and of course now Hendon Hooker's kind of in that conversation now too, because obviously he had such an incredible year last year until his injury. So, but like I said, overall it was a great day, a great spotlight for the football program.
We got Kevin McGuffey here to talk some Kentucky football. You can catch Kevin's work there at Last Word on College Football. We'll pull up the banner here. And so we know from our various conversations with Kevin that we will not get to enjoy again this year. We will not get to enjoy a Kentucky spring game.
Right.
So is there going to be some kind of, I would think, some type of news conference, some type of wrap up spring practice to kind of pull everything together?
Actually, this coming Saturday, they're having a like a fan day kind of thing. It's an open practice where everybody can come and watch them, practice, watch them, go through the reps and go through things and just kind of see how the team looks. So the practices aren't scheduled to end until the next Saturday, but they're kind of they want to do it this weekend because most of the high schools are on spring break, and they're using that as a big recruiting. They're going to have a ton of players on campus this weekend to coincide. So that's why they're doing it this week instead of next weekend. So to get some recruits in, possible recruits in, show them everything, let them watch through the practices and everything. So that's why they're doing it. That's why they're doing it this week. So, but in case you had been following along, Kentucky, they're replacing the turf at Kroger Field. So, and that's why we're not having a spring game this year. Unfortunate. It's the third time in the last 4 years, 2020 and 21, were obviously COVID, and they were back to normal last year. And now, like I said, no game this year. But there we go. So that's what's that's why. But like I said, that's why it's happening this weekend.
So this is a pretty easy question to answer, Kevin. I could have answered this question, but we'll leave it to the experts. So LFG, and there's a few others there in the chat, Ed Rogers and others that are asking who will be the QB number one for Kentucky. There are no candidates, LFG. Believe me, there are no candidates. There's just one.
Oh, you're talking about for this season?
Yeah, he says who are the top QB1 candidates for 2023 Kentucky college football?
It's Devin Leary, the North Carolina State transfer, came in this year. By all reports, he's been healthy so far. He had the torn pectoral muscle. He's been taking part in practice. They had him on kind of to use a baseball term, had him on a pitch count. As far as throwing, but he's making some great strides. The staff's really happy. One of the biggest things he's had to learn or relearn is taking snaps under center, because with the Liam Cohen offense, the quarterback's under center most of the time. Whereas if you watch Wolfpack North Carolina State games, he went from the shotgun most of the time. So it's pretty much Devin. I don't want to say Devin Leary or bust, because that would be affair to. But behind him, you've got Destin Wade, who started the Music City Bowl last year. Then you got Kaya Sharon, and you've got Deuce Hogan. So those are your that's your. And then there's another. The name escapes me now, but he's a transfer from Dayton. Like I said, that one escapes me, but he's if something happens with Leary, I think Wade probably right now would have the nod over the other two, just because he probably has more that run pass option, maybe has a little more to offer than either Sharon or Hogan. Sharon did a great job, I thought, he started the South Carolina game when Levis was injured last year, and I thought, did some pretty good things. Obviously, Kentucky lost that game, but it's Devin Leary, and the Big Blue Nation is really excited about seeing what Leary can do in that offense with under Liam Cohen. Because you think about what happened 2 years ago, which kind of Levis blew up on the national scene that year. But then you and I have talked before with the receivers. The top 5 receivers are back for this year. You've got Berrien Brown, you got Dane Key, Tavion Robinson. It's weird sometimes to talk about how Kentucky might have this magical, wonderful offense and score a lot of points because, as we know, Stoops would probably just soon win a game like 10-7 as as the old school defensive guy that he is. But they averaged 33 points a game in 2021 with Cohen here, and I think that's a good starting point for 2023. But yeah, Devin Leary is your guy.
We've got Kevin McGuffey on the line from Last Word on College Football to talk up the Cats. Kevin, so I'm in the midst of producing a series in which I'm looking at TV ratings. And what prompted me to do this is, of course, the Pac-12 is currently looking at a media rights deal, and they're having all sorts of issues trying to pull that off. And the fate of their conference may be hanging in the balance because of that. So I posted a video the other day that's got some good reviews on it, where I kind of broke down Pac-12 TV ratings to see, okay, how popular is this brand? And then it only makes sense, obviously, to go through each conference. So I've posted the Pac-12, then the Big 12, then the ACC yesterday, and I'll do the SEC and the Big 10. And it's by no shock to anyone that the SEC and the Big 10 dominate the TV ratings. But I'm going to reflect that in a number of different ways and different angles. So since we've got you on the line, thought I'd go through Kentucky's TV ratings. Let's do this. So looking at last season, week 1 was against Miami of Ohio. That was an SEC Network Plus game, ESPN Plus, so that's not going to show up anywhere. But we will take this back to, I'll post these here in just a second as soon as I line this up. We'll start in week 2 against Florida, which I remember watching that game. That was a primetime game on ESPN. So that obviously fared extremely well, and just kind of get your impressions of these TV ratings. So here's a week 2 matchup, obviously against Florida, that got a great rating on ESPN. It was the 3rd highest rated game of the week, behind Alabama, Texas, and Tennessee Pitt. Again, primetime game. 4.3 million people watched Kentucky and Florida. The Cats won the game.
Yeah, and if you look at that, as I'm looking at it correctly, the top 2 games were actually on broadcast TV, whereas the Kentucky Florida game was ESPN. So it would have been the number 1, I guess, rated show on for cable for that day. Yeah, I mean, Kentucky, obviously, when you talk about Kentucky ratings, you talk more about basketball, because almost every game that Kentucky's on basketball wise, it's always, highly rated. But I think especially that game, Kentucky, because if you remember back correctly, or to last year, you had that was right after Anthony Richardson had that incredible, I don't want to say breakout game against Utah. But, you had the whole thing, okay, Will Levis versus Anthony Richardson, and, they hyped that up, for a whole week. And the fact that it was a great game, it went down to the wire. And for us in the Big Blue Nation, Kentucky pulled that one out. So it does not surprise me that one was so highly rated, and might have been one of the highest ones you'll probably find with Kentucky. We'll have to see once you go through the numbers here. So.
Yeah, so that's a good point that you make, because, folks, if you understand anything about television, especially with cable cord cutting going on, is that, and my numbers might be off by a little bit, but not by much. And Kevin, you can correct me, but there's about 115 million homes in the country. And at one point, the cable saturation was up well over 100 million. But I think it's down to, I think ESPN might be down 85 million, something in that range. So for them to be able to draw that many viewers, they're doing it with 20 or probably about 30 million less TV homes that don't have cable. So that's what they're up against.
Right.
there.
And see, and I never know whether like the streaming for people that have ESPN, watch it through like ESPN or the
Yeah.
Hulu, the bundles. I don't know if those ratings, I don't know if those ratings count in with that or not. But to talk about just to tie it into NBC real quick. Of course, I'm sure as you know, NBC is now one of the homes for Big Ten football
Yep.
starting this year, and so that's pretty big. NBC for a while was kind of getting away from sports, but now they've kind of pulled it back in. I think what the Big Ten has pulled off, where they're going to have games on Fox and they're going to have games on NBC, games on CBS. I mean, I think it's massive, and I know the NBC folks are excited about it, and so you're going to have Notre Dame football and the Big Ten, so that's pretty that's pretty good Saturday's worth of TV. So.
Absolutely. Kentucky played Youngstown State on the SEC network the next week. And I'm surprised. This is a go-to site of mine in Sports Media Watch, but they don't have the SEC network. They've got the Big Ten network, and I know that the SEC network has been in business since 2014. So there are ratings for the network, but I don't know why they're not on here. So
yeah. I frequent this site a lot as well, like looking for numbers and things like that. I saw Kentucky as you were scrolling through there down a little further.
So I was going to fly by week 3. This is week 4 against Northern Illinois. So this game was on ESPN2, 555,000 views on a Saturday night for that one.
Right. Yeah, and that was another one. That game was actually a lot closer than most of us. It was a little too close for comfort, but again, it's probably the name recognition. Most people probably weren't expecting much of a game on that. And if they probably went like, quarter by quarter, by the time you got to the fourth quarter, it probably got, the numbers probably jumped because it was a close game that Kentucky ended up, pulling out there in the end. So yeah, that one being kind of low doesn't surprise me. So
I believe the next week is going to be a good ratings game because Ole Miss and Kentucky at noon did really well. And they were up against Michigan and Iowa. So between those two games, they were the 3rd and 4th highest rated games of the week. And again, Kentucky and Ole Miss drew about 2.8 million at noon.
Yeah, that was one that was a really, really great game that went down to the wire. Kentucky had every chance in the world to win that game, and it just didn't happen. So, but as I said, that one does not surprise me a bit that one was so highly rated. So, and yes, to LFG's point, he's right. Cohen runs more NFL style offense. We'll see about the running first. It depends on they've got Ray Davis and Juton McClain, so they got two backs that are definitely going to carry the load. That's for sure for Kentucky.
The next couple of weeks, Kentucky took on South Carolina and Mississippi State on the SEC network, so those won't show up, unfortunately. But then they had a game against, let's see, we've got a bye week, and then this game's going to be high. Yeah, Kentucky, Tennessee. That was not a pretty affair in Knoxville, but it did draw a lot of viewers, over 4 million. The fourth highest rated game of the week.
If you look, it's the the first 3, the top 3 games were network, and then and then you have Kentucky there. Yeah, that was if you're a Tennessee fan, that was the best game ever. Not the best game ever. That's probably the week before when you beat Alabama, but yeah, from Kentucky standpoint, to use a Mark Stoops term, that was a total systems failure that day. And Mike Laval, who I know you know very well, the resident Tennessee person, and at last word, I heard more than I wanted to hear about that after that game. But you beat somebody 44-6, you're allowed to talk all the trash you want. It's kind of the way I look at it. So
and I think, I don't remember for sure, but I know I contemplated picking an upset there. But the next 2 weeks, Mizzou and Vandy, those were on the SEC network, so we've got nothing there. And then the last game of the season that we'll have a rating on is Kentucky held in against Georgia, 16-6 game, and that one did pretty well at about 4.5 million views on CBS.
Yeah, and that to your point, you think about Brad White in that defense. Kentucky held Georgia to 16 points. It was a game, that went. I don't ever think Kentucky had a chance to win, but you think about like what Georgia did in the championship game. I think they might have scored. The old joke, they might have scored 2 more touchdowns while we're talking here. But for Kentucky to hold them to 16 points, I mean, it was a pretty incredible accomplishment for Brad White in that defense. And like I said, that those are some good numbers there too. There's the Tennessee South Carolina game. I was actually surprised that one might have been a little bit higher because that one was a crazy game.
Yeah.
So, and I don't remember the Ohio State. I don't remember those two, if they were blowouts, if they were.
No, Ohio State, Maryland. That was a good game. Yeah, Georgia, Kentucky was up against the number 1 game of the week. 6.6 million views. So a lot of people were watching college football at 3:30. Between those 2 games, there were, over 11 million views.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to the bowl game because the Louisville game was on the SEC network. So I'm curious about this bowl game. Now, unfortunately for Kentucky, I know that they were up against other competition, and this really annoys me. And I make this comment to Kevin every year that I get annoyed when throughout the entire bowl season, all these games are exclusive, which is great. You want to see that game. You don't have to try to fight to watch like 3 games at the same time. Then we get to close to New Year's Day when the better teams and the better brands are playing, and they're playing against each other. So there we go. We've got the Music City Bowl against Iowa at 3 million views, which is a pretty good showing. But at the same time, let's see, that Saturday at noon.
Right. I think that was Kansas State and Alabama, I believe.
Yeah, which was one of the, there you go. It's the 5th highest game, including the playoffs. It's the 2nd highest bowl game with over 9 million views at noon on Saturday. So they're having to fight against that game. And I thought there was another game.
There was, I think it was either the Gator. No, it wasn't the Gator Bowl. There was another one on because the UK game was on ABC, and then I can't remember what the other game was, but there was another one. There was 3 games.
Was it?
It might have been Tampa. No, it wasn't Tampa Bay.
It's got to be a higher rated game than that. I'm missing it here.
I'm drawing a blank now, but I agree with you that it seems weird that they don't or at least stagger the games or do something, like have the one, because I think the Citrus Bowl, like I said, was also not the Citrus Bowl. The Music City Bowl was on at noon, but then stagger these games or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but I thought there was another game there too, but I can't find it. Anyway, maybe like the Purdue LSU game, maybe not. I can't find it. Regardless, just an interesting look there into people.
Yeah,
people were watching Kentucky football.
Yeah, and with the exception of that game, you and I have talked in the past that the ESPN networks must love Kentucky, because usually in that 5-game bowl winning streak, every one of them went down to the to the last minute almost. So when they beat Penn State, they got out to the huge lead and had to hold on. Then of course the Lynn Bowden game against Virginia Tech in the Belk Bowl, where Kentucky drove 80 yards to win. The North Carolina State game the next year. Unfortunately, like I said, last year was just just a bad day, because you had Levis and Chris Rodriguez both opt out of the game. And we talked about Destin Wade earlier, that he basically got his first, hadn't played a snap all year, but hey, you're going to start the bowl game against one of the best defenses in America in Iowa. So it didn't, obviously that didn't work out for us very well, but still, he got some experience, and as we, tie it back into earlier, I think he's your, going into the spring, he's your, he's your backup quarterback. So, or I don't want to say backup, we'll say QB2 for the Cats.
Have you come across any recruiting news? Is there anything that's worth noting here recently?
Not really. Uh, I think we'll have a better idea. I heard a doorbell ringing outside here. I think we'll have a better idea after this upcoming weekend because they're going to have all these players in, and for for the pro not the pro day but for the fan day. So I think maybe by next week we probably will hear more about recruits possibly.
Very good. Kevin McGuffey, last word on college football. Get on over there, check out Kevin's work. He will have his bowl projections coming our way at some point.
Yep. Yeah, I just posted. I have a recap of Pro Day up there right now. I also want to mention somebody. I mentioned Chris Rodriguez. He's somebody that I think really helped himself on Friday. He ran a 4.5 40, which I think shocked a lot of people. Unofficially, I think it was even quicker than that. He had a 33-inch vertical leap. Everybody likes to compare him. He and Benny Snell, he was like a full tenth and a half second faster than Snell. So I think and then he was one of the players that took part in the pass catching drills with Levis, showing that he can catch the ball because, for a lot of that time in Kentucky, he didn't really, wasn't involved in the pass game. But he's somebody I think, is considered maybe a late third day pick. He may have bumped himself up to, possibly a fifth round, maybe late fourth round, fifth round. Of course, it just when you get to that point, it just depends on the team and their needs, and we'll see what happens. But I think he had a good. I think he made a good showing on Friday. So I have a recap of that, and I'm also doing spring previews, position by position. I finished the offense, so later this week we'll start with the defense. With the defensive line, we'll do the linebackers, and then the secondary, and then I'll probably throw in the kickers and stuff after that along with it. So, but yeah, probably one a week for the next 2 or 3 weeks to help us get through the rest of the spring, and then it'll be get ready for the NFL draft, and we'll be on Will Levis watch.
There we go. Kevin McGuffey, last word on college football. Get on over there. Check out Kevin's work. All right, Kevin. Appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me on again, as always, and I look forward to probably talking to you next week.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll see you.
All right, thank you. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.
All right, good stuff from Kevin. As always, I enjoy looking at the television ratings. We want to remind everyone that we've got Iowa Hawkeyes live coming up at 5:30 Eastern time. Also, a big shout out again to our many YouTube members. And please check out the YouTube memberships. There are 3 tiers. Check them out. If you have any questions, you can always hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Next show, Iowa Hawkeyes live at 5:30 Eastern on the Iowa channel. And then we've got Nebraska live as well at 7 Eastern. So please join us then. And we will see you soon to talk some more college football right here at the Voice of College Football.